Welcome to 10th or Tuesday, episode number 38. My name is Michael Boldin, joined by my good buddy,
Michael Maharrey.
For those of you who aren't aware, we've been away for a few weeks. Mike and I took a trip down to New Orleans, where we attended and participated in the Take Human Action Bash, presented by the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus. There are a lot of great speakers there. Scott Horton from antiwar.com, Tom Woods, Bob Murphy. We got to have lunch with Walter Block, the great Mises Institute scholar. Cool stuff, right?
That was very cool. I enjoyed it a lot. I got to finally meet the infamous Bob Murphy, who, oddly, I'd never met until that event. So that was kind of cool.
Bob's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And thank you for tuning in. That's the end of our show today. So back to work, of course. And I had to do a little math, but we're up to day 537 that the GOP has failed to get rid of Obamacare, gun control, or end mass surveillance, all kinds of nasty stuff that's on the books. Common Core, of course, is still around. And I don't think it's going to change. And, you know, Mike, and I didn't add this to our notes of what I wanted to talk about today, but clearly last night we had the issue of the new Supreme Court nominee. And I'm getting a lot of feedback on your end.
Like feedback on the sound?
Yeah.
I wonder why. I don't hear it.
Well, who cares? Let's roll with it. I'll have to just figure it out. Be a professional about this. So the new Supreme Court nominee, and I like what you had posted on Facebook. This is a great little quip. The fact that everybody is on pins and needles about an unelected, unaccountable, politically connected lawyer and where that person will take the republic says a lot about America's system of government. None of it good. Care to comment on that, Mike?
Well, yeah, I was on the Facebook last night about 8 o'clock, so I guess everybody was all in anticipation for the announcement, and everybody was, who might it be, and could it mean the end of Roe v. Wade? And I'm like, no. I mean, you know, we see these all the time. We're supposed to have this momentum shift in the political sea, and nothing ever really changes. It's just like the way we introduced this show. We're 500 plus days into the Trump administration, and that was supposed to be the great change from the Obama. It's not that much different. We're still bombing countries in unconstitutional wars. We're still spending more money than the last administration. We're still spying on everybody. We're still meddling in education. So all of this stuff continues on, no matter who's in office, no matter who's on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I was going to be a betting man, knowing the way courts operate, they operate on precedent. They're not going to roll anything back. They're going to continue to interpret the Constitution the way they have for the last 100 years. They're going to continue to expand the power of all these clauses, and they're going to continue to erode away our rights. I'm not very excited about this dude. I don't even know who it is.
Brett Kavanaugh is the guy. He's a George W. Bush unitary executive supporter.
Great.
I mean, he's good on probably on Chevron and maybe dealing with the administrative state because he's a D.C. guy, but he's definitely a guy that's going to defer to executive power. National security is the argument. He's got a track record of probably saying the executive can do what they need to as long as national security is the excuse. And maybe that's why Trump likes him. I'm not sure. I'm sure that's why George Bush liked him. Barack Obama loves those type of people as well. So I actually take it another step, too, very similar to what you do, Mike. But I was on with Lions of Liberty recording for a podcast that's going to air tomorrow with Brian McWilliams on their Wednesday podcast. And I had mentioned to him, hey, you know, if we look back at James Madison's advice in Federalist 46, and Mike, you know where I'm going with this right off the bat, I'm sure. Madison gave us a bunch of advice on what to do with federal overreach, 4 steps. Not one of them, none of them included going to the Supreme Court to sue the federal government to limit federal power. Not one of them included voting the bums out to find new federal politicians to limit federal power. He did advise, though, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union, states using legislative devices to undermine federal power, protests, having governors be very outspoken, things like that on a state, local, and individual level. And if people were doing this on basically everything the federal government throws at us, the Supreme Court wouldn't even be coming in play in most situations.
I made this exact same point to a guy this morning who was talking about the only way that we can roll back all of the liberal decisions that the court has made is to get conservatives on the court and reverse them. And I made that exact same point. I said the only way you're ever going to limit the federal power that's been, pushed through this court system is for states to get the cojones to go ahead and nullify all of these unconstitutional acts.
And mind you, when I was talking with Brian, I also mentioned, he asked me, what do you think about this, the new Supreme Court nominee? And I just pointed out that back in 2005, in the famous case Gonzalez versus Raich, the great conservative icon, the jurist Justice Scalia, held that growing a plant in your backyard, never taking it across state lines, never buying or selling it, and consuming it in your own backyard in your own home counted as interstate commerce.
Right.
So what happens when you have a conservative-leaning Supreme Court? Or you're going to have some things that appeal to conservatives, but then you're also going to have an overreach of federal power that can be used for other stuff. Scalia's argument against marijuana that conservatives in many ways cheered because they liked federal prohibition. Well, maybe not conservatives as much today, but at the time there was a lot of support. Scalia was an icon. But his arguments were used to defend Obamacare. So even if you like the outcome of having a nationalized power over something to stop people from doing things that you think are bad, eventually they're going to use that power against you. And we shouldn't rely on the Supreme Court. I think the message that we're both putting out there, Mike, is that the problem is relying on the Supreme Court over and over and over. Eventually, things are just, where they are right now.
Right. It's absurd because you're relying on a branch of the federal government to limit the federal government. And, I've used this analogy. I used it in my book, Our Last Hope. It would be like me having a player on the New York Giants serve as the referee in a game with the Giants playing the Cowboys. Well, nobody would do that because this guy's on one of the teams, and the Supreme Court is on one of the teams. So when we expect the federal government to limit itself, essentially, it's an absurdity. Nobody would think that in any other context. And yet we've been brainwashed into this idea that, everything flows through D.C. and it all depends on, it's just really absurd to me. And just to drive this home, to think about the fact that one person could have so much impact over 350 million people is really kind of scary when you think about it. I mean, why would you ever want to give one person that much power? Nobody who is sane would do that unless they thought that the power was going to be only used to their benefit. And we know that never happens.
I know a lot of neocons want to wipe the people of Iran, well, maybe the government of Iran off the face of the earth, but the government of Iran, in a way, it's ruled by mullahs, which is, in essence, their Supreme Court.
Right.
That get to make, you get a few unelected, unaccountable, politically connected, I don't know if they're lawyers, but the religious folk that get to have the final say over all kinds of stuff. I mean, in a way, that's kind of what we have right now, and it's not a good place to be. It can turn around. We have seen things turn around. For those of you who read our annual report over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report, you'll see 70 pages of stuff, not only explaining the process of how to deal with federal overreach, but many ways it's being put into practice, whether it's on asset forfeiture, surveillance, gun control, healthcare freedom, the drug war, sound money, all kinds of interesting things. So that's my segue. I'm trying to get better at segues. I've never been good. So sound money, we just saw just this month on July 1st in Wyoming, House Bill 103, the Legal Tender Act, just went into effect. Mike, can you give us an overview of what's going on there, why it's important, and all that good stuff?
So there are two important elements to this bill. The first is that gold and silver specie will now be considered legal tender and usable to pay taxes or any type of debt you might have to the government. So in essence, it puts gold and silver on par with Federal Reserve notes as far as the state of Wyoming concerns. So in essence, the state of Wyoming has declared gold and silver money, which is what it is in the first place. So it has the same legal standing as legal tender. Very important step in terms of creating currency competition. The second important part of this is more of a practical part, and that's the fact that it eliminated all taxes on the transfer of gold and silver. So up until July 1st, if you sold gold or silver, or you bought gold or silver, you would have to deal with sales taxes, no more. So again, we're creating an environment that makes it more comfortable, not comfortable, that's not the right word, more, what's the word I'm looking for?
I have no idea, but I would like to actually comment on, you talk about buying and selling gold and silver, and I think that's the mindset of the investment class, investor class. Right. People are looking at gold and silver as a way to purchase something, protect their wealth or their money, whatever it may be, and that is certainly a part of it. But what we're talking about, I think, takes things a step further. We're talking about using gold and silver as money, and we can talk about that. We've produced a number of videos of how it actually can be done that actually refutes a lot of stupid arguments like, oh, you got to have a bunch of coins in your pocket, which is nonsense. But that's we're not talking about just having taxes on the buying and selling. We're talking about there have been sales taxes or capital gains taxes in many places just using gold to purchase something. So let's say you had an easy way to purchase something with gold and silver. Let's say you set up an account at a place like United Precious Metals Association, upma.org, over in Utah. It's like a gold bank in essence. And let's say you had $1,000 of gold on account there and you got yourself a debit card. So you went to a merchant and you made a purchase in Wyoming up until, let's say, like June 30th. Well, the purchase at the merchant is automatically converted from gold to fiat when they swipe that card. So they're getting the fiat in their bank account through their merchant processor. But UPMA is taking the gold, converting it to fiat. So if you had to do sales tax or if there was capital gains tax, you would be taxed on the exchange from gold to fiat before the purchase is made. So if there's a 5% tax or a 10% tax, if you made a $1,000 purchase, that would now cost you $1,100 because you would be charged the additional 10%. So removing that tax actually makes it easier. It gets something out of the way. It makes it more cost-effective to make purchases and day-to-day transactions in sound money.
That was a really, really good example.
Okay.
Well done. And I would look at it another way. Let's say that you and I were entering into a business transaction of some sort. You know, I was going to write you some articles for the 10th Amendment Center, like that would ever happen. And you were going to pay me in precious metals. Well, I could be subject to capital gains tax on that, as opposed to if you pay me in fiat currency, I would only have to pay income taxes. So again, we see how these onerous taxes make it more difficult to use gold and silver for what it really is, money, the perfect exchange of medium. So by eliminating these taxes, you are eliminating a lot of barriers. You're creating a market. You're making it so that people can use gold and silver in everyday transactions if they choose to do so. That means currency competition. And ultimately, if enough people were to start doing this, we could render Federal Reserve notes utterly useless because, well, they're valueless. So why would you want to use them?
I think it's very unlikely to see that outcome happening in the short term, primarily not because there aren't systems to be able to do this. We're seeing them happen with UPMA, also the Texas Bullion Depository, which is the state-backed version of that down in Texas, which just opened. Then, of course, there's goldmoney.com, which is partly owned by Peter Schiff through Schiff Gold and his partners there. So there are systems being built to actually facilitate sound money transactions. We see states like Wyoming, also Arizona, Utah, Texas, and others that are taking steps to get government out of the way of gold and silver transactions as money. But a lot of people don't believe or have education on this. So there's a huge educational part on this. And it's more than just reading books, and it's more than sharing videos, and it's more than us talking about it. But what's most important that's going to teach people how this works is to actually use the product.
Yeah.
So once you start using sound money, people learn that the world doesn't end, that people aren't dying in the streets, and you're not having to carry around a bunch of gold coins to purchase a coffee. Then they're going to say, well, maybe I can try that too.
Yeah, and this really gets to what we've talked about, I think, increasingly over the last couple of years, and that's the idea of individual nullification. We can pass all of the state laws and all of the local ordinances we want to, but ultimately what drives this is people willing to take the action that the federal government doesn't want them to take. I mean, that's really what drove the marijuana legalization. There was a demand for that before California ever passed that first law back in 1996. So it's very important for us as individuals to figure out ways that we can live more free, whether the federal government wants us to or not, and then take those actions and then work to get the state laws in place that help facilitate those activities, as we've seen with marijuana, hemp, sound money, healthcare, all of these different things.
So Wyoming, HB 103, the Legal Tender Act, is now in effect. Of course, we mentioned a few other places like Utah, Texas, Arizona. For those of you who are really interested in setting up accounts, UPMA or Gold Money UPMA.org or Gold Money might be a good option. I haven't actually set one up at either, so here we are preaching this. I mean, as a 10th Amendment Center activist, I don't think either of us have much extra money on the side to actually open an account in anything, but for those of you who want to help us make that happen, of course, we're going to go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I think this is a good time to insert that promotion.
That was an excellent segue.
But seriously, though, we absolutely can't. If there are a lot of people that have been supporting our work for like small amounts, $2 a month, and some people say, oh, you know, I can't really support you guys. I'd love to make a donation. And I say, well, how about $2? $2 is important because as you multiply that over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, eventually it pays the bills. And then once it starts paying the bills, which it has been for a little bit of time now, then the more that we get, the more that we can expand and do new things and reach new people and educate more people and then show people how to do things and on and on and on. The circles keep going. So 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, you'll find all of our membership options there. So thank you for that message from our sponsor. Back to the news. Also, a very interesting issue that the current administration has been really bad on. While there are, I was telling Brian McWilliams yesterday that, and I know you mentioned the wars, Mike, that I was really in favor of Trump meeting with Kim in North Korea. I think this is incredible. It gave me chills to some point because my whole life, no president was willing to actually have a talk. And my view, you can call me a Russian agent. I don't give a damn what anybody says. The fact of the matter is having a conversation with someone is always better than lining their coast with a bunch of nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. Mm-hmm. So having a conversation is the best first step forward. I think Trump is incredibly bad on foreign policy in most situations, but that was the best I've seen in my lifetime in regards to North Korea. Mm-hmm. So I learned from the Ron Paul Liberty Report maybe just a few weeks ago, and I went and I dug through some of the statistics that, George W. Bush, even with the physical invasion of Iraq, had dropped 70,000 bombs. Then Barack Obama, over his 2 terms, then Barack Obama ramped that up to 100,000. And so what is that? Like over 8 years, like 12 or 15,000 a year? My government schooling gave me really bad math skills.
I'm not good at math either.
So you also went to a government school?
I did.
So it happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
So Trump actually dropped over 40,000 bombs in his first year, almost 4 times as bad as Obama and like 6 times or so worse than George Bush. So
it comes to like 12 bombs every second.
Yeah, or minute?
Or 12 bombs a minute. Yeah, maybe that was it. It was a big number of bombs in a short
bomb every 12 minutes, something. It's a huge number. It's over 40,000. Maybe it's 44,000 over the full year, his first year in office. we can only hope that that subsides and cuts back, because we know that Barack Obama was incredibly bad with the number of enforcement actions and spending on federal enforcement in his first term against marijuana. He was worse than Bush and Clinton combined. So it's possible. We've seen these federal politicians sometimes come into logistical nightmares over these types of things, and then they just have to slow it down. So hopefully Trump will slow that down. I think it was very positive that he met with the king of North Korea, whatever we want to call the guy. But where was I going with that? I don't know. This was my bad segue into asset forfeiture.
Well, I think your point is that Trump has been good on a few things, but he's been really bad on some things in foreign policy, and he's been really bad on asset forfeiture, in particular Jeff Sessions.
Well, really and it goes actually back. I think Jeff Sessions is actually, this is my just gut instinct, because the first thing we heard about asset forfeiture, for those of you who are unaware, asset forfeiture is where they basically charge your property with a crime, and your property has to prove that it was innocent. They take your stuff. They don't allow you to get it back. You have to prove your innocence to get your property back, if you can even do it. And it's government stealing, legalized government stealing. It's really bad stuff. Trump made the first comment about this. He had this meeting with like a round table with some law enforcement groups at the White House, and he said, yeah, he was actually going after a Texas state senator. I think it was Connie Burton, a Republican, a longtime Republican activist and a Republican Party member who was working to stop asset forfeiture from happening in Texas. And I don't think he knew anything about the person, but he had heard that this was happening in Texas and basically saying, well, maybe we need to go after this person. I don't know if he wanted to primary them or something, because he's so in favor of this tool for law enforcement. Right. Now, Jeff Sessions, and we haven't heard a peep from Trump on that since then, but Jeff Sessions has been very aggressive about trying to expand the federal equitable sharing program. Mike, give us the overview of that program.
So equitable sharing is essentially a federal asset forfeiture that is in partnership with state and local law enforcement. And once it's all said and done, up to 80% of the proceeds from that forfeiture go back to the participating state and local agencies. So what ends up happening is the states that have particularly strong asset forfeiture laws that make it more difficult for police to process asset forfeiture, or that keep them from getting to keep the money, what they'll do is they'll simply partner up with their quote-unquote federal partners and then pass the cases off to the feds, let the feds process the asset forfeiture, bypasses the more strict state laws, and then that money flows back into state and local law enforcement budgets for them to buy tanks and spyware and whatever other toys they might happen to want to buy.
Yeah, it's really, really nasty end run around the states. This is basically the federal government turning local law enforcement into agents of the federal government. Well, they already are in most situations, but paying them to do it, 80% of the take. And Jeff Sessions is a big fan of this process. He really wants to ramp it up. And a number of states have basically opted out in most situations. Colorado, California, Arizona to some degree, Nebraska, New Mexico, Ohio. I'm probably missing somebody. So one of the most difficult parts of doing that is actually having information on how the state is doing this, how they are partnering with the equitable sharing program. And that's one of the biggest roadblocks. We say, how do we know this is even happening? Well, two laws that just went into effect in Kansas and Virginia actually help this process, help us end civil asset forfeiture and partnership with the equitable sharing program on the federal level, because they're requiring a reporting of how much they're participating in that program. Is that a good summary of how those new laws, Mike?
Absolutely. So this is a first step toward reforming asset forfeiture laws, making people aware, getting the information out there. As I say in the reports, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So when we see what's going on, that creates the outrage, that creates the momentum necessary to get the actual laws changed. And both of these reporting bills that have gone into effect in Kansas and Virginia are extensive, and they both require detailed reporting on federal asset forfeiture. So when the state and local law enforcement are passing these cases to the federal government. That's going to be documented. We're going to be able to look at that and see exactly how often this is going on and under what circumstances, whether or not charges are ever being filed, whether people are being convicted. We're going to be able to get a very detailed view of what is going on in these two states. And I'm certain that that's going to be able to create momentum at the grassroots level to then move forward with asset forfeiture reforms, which should absolutely include prohibiting this passing off of cases to the federal government.
So interestingly enough, this is so let's say we're pushing a bill in a state like, I don't know, Oklahoma to stop asset forfeiture. There's been a number of people who've been working in Oklahoma, really good people trying to stop asset forfeiture there. One of the biggest roadblocks, especially on dealing with equitable sharing, is, well, how do you know this? This is like a conspiracy theory. It's not really happening, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. But on the other hand, so they've either had to take that part out of the legislation to try to get it moved, or just not be able to respond to the inquiry or to the challenge because there's no data on it. However, in Colorado, when these types of things come up, someone had actually, and I'm not sure how they actually got this information, if they had passed a reporting requirement previously or someone actually did. I think, Mike, you probably know. But they learned that it was like 80 or 85% of cases were being, is that right? Give me the numbers.
I don't remember either.
Okay, cool.
It was that 80 to 85%.
Well, basically, the short version, without getting bogged down in the details that we can't remember, the short version is that the reporting was available in Colorado. So the grassroots, the people trying to support it, the people pressuring a committee, for example, in the state Senate, knew this information. It was published in the papers. There were editorials written about it. People were talking about it. There were large amounts of these cases were being handed off to the federal government. And so, therefore, they limited the amount of cases they could pass off to the federal government. They basically just opted out. That was part of the process. So now we see in Kansas and Virginia, they're going to have to start making that data available. Whether we can rely on that data or whether people actually do something with that data is a whole nother question. We don't know how it's going to play out, right?
Right. And that's where, again, going back to this individual effort, it's very important for people who care about this stuff to get involved and start sticking their noses into the process. And I did an interview this morning with a local radio station related to the work I'm doing here in my hometown on surveillance. And he asked me flat out, after my second trip to court, he said, has it been worth it? And I said, yeah, it has been worth it because it's important for the community. It's important for us to know what's going on. And if nobody steps up, then we're going to have our liberties eroded away. And when that happens, you can't blame anybody but yourself. If you're not doing anything, if you're not taking the information available, if you're not doing the work, then you've got nobody to blame but yourself when the federal government tramples all over your rights and liberties and steals your money. So it's important for people to get involved. And so that's my little...
I just dug up as you were saying this meme that we had posted. Maybe I should put this up sometime soon again. A quote from Patrick Henry at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Monday, June 9th, 1788. Quote, "The liberties of a people never were, nor ever will be, secure when the transaction of their rulers may be concealed from them."
Yes.
I think Patrick Henry was a pretty smart dude. He was definitely on our side as far as wanting to advance liberty. He may be one of the greatest when it comes to that. Whether he was right or wrong in his strategies is another question. I know there are people divided on that, but certainly his comments about governments hiding what they're doing is a guarantee that we will not have liberty. I think that plays out. So the less people know, the worse we are off. So these laws in Kansas and Virginia requiring reporting on asset forfeiture, how much they're doing it, how much they're participating with the federal government on this, is a very important step. It's a powerful tool that people need to use in those states to take the next step. Also in New Jersey, a similar bill passed the state Senate unanimously. I think it was 37-0, Senate Bill 1963. So that's going to go to the state assembly next to see if they can get that to the governor's desk.
Yeah, there's a real strong coalition of folks that are working to move that bill forward too. That's one of the states where we see groups of people that have a very specific strategy, and they flat out said, this is step one, and then we're going to use this to build on it to steps 2 and 3 and beyond. So
off the top of your head, do you know any of the people in the coalition? There's I think Americans for Prosperity.
That's the only 2 that I remember. I think there's 8 organizations that are involved in the coalition.
I'm going to look this up. I'm clicking through. Okay, so it's Americans for Prosperity, Generation Opportunity, Right on Crime, Law Enforcement Action Partnership, Young Americans for Liberty, 10th Amendment Center, International Center for Law and Economics, and Institute for Justice. That's awesome.
Pretty solid, right?
Right on Crime is the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Yeah, it's important to be able to work together. I think a lot of these organizations can find a lot of common ground, but there are areas where people disagree. And I find a lot of times, and especially we saw down at the Libertarian National Convention, there are these factions that just hate each other. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, you're such a small segment of the society now.
Right.
You can have your fights over, what lifestyle is acceptable and what isn't. At some point, just be anti-state. The government is actually causing the problems, and move forward with that. So we like setting up coalitions. We work a lot on coalitions. We've had some negative feedback about our work on coalitions. When we work with the ACLU, some of the right-wingers say, oh, these are terrible people, and maybe they are. Maybe they disagree with us.
I got an email not too long ago from somebody being very critical of the fact that I'm having the ACLU represent me in my lawsuit.
Yeah, you should just lose.
Just lose. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to work with those guys.
Lose your home, lose your income. The government's going to sue you into oblivion to get you to shut up, and then they want you to pay for it because you want to expose their surveillance process, where they get the funding for it, what they're doing with the data, etc. You should just lose. Even though the ACLU volunteered to represent you from the evil 10th Amendment Center, the gun rights supporting TAC, the healthcare freedom supporting TAC, which ACLU absolutely opposes. They told us to our face when we met with them at their national headquarters in New York. In fact, they laughed at us. Oh, well, you guys are kind of into that whole anti-Obamacare thing. And, yeah, we are. Yeah. But, well, I guess we're not going to talk about that because we're not going to agree. So they don't like us either on a lot of stuff, and I'm sure they hear garbage. Why would you represent those people? Right. So, you know what?
And what's cool is through those working relationships, I've developed personal relationship with people that I would now call friends, that even though we disagree on some policy, we found a lot of common ground and a lot of reasons to say, hey, we can agree on these things. And I don't know, I get kind of frustrated.
The next time someone says that to you, just ask them if they never go home for Thanksgiving.
That's perfect.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. It's in a way it's meant to be funny, but there's a dark humor behind that, and I think it's very serious, because if they're saying don't talk to people, don't ever work with people, don't coordinate with people unless they agree with you on everything, which means only work with yourself. You and I wouldn't work together because I'm sure we can find plenty of places we would disagree on stuff too. Every person is an individual. So why not try to get things done where you can? And why not try to be friends where you can? This is the same argument that Donald Trump should not have met with the evil leader of North Korea. I also heard some people say, why would the North Koreans ever want to meet with the only country on earth to ever use a nuclear weapon? So, the mentality is absurd. At some point, people have to start talking to each other, shaking each other's hands, setting aside differences, finding common ground, and making things happen rather than constantly at each other's throats, which is exactly where the central power lovers want us to be.
I just want to make it clear that wherever we disagree, I'm right.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. That was a great day. I thought I'd make that official. No, the pause was intended to be long there.
Well, no, that was like if you're for those out there who tune into the Contra Krugman podcast
Oh,
with
right.
Tom Woods and Bob Murphy. That's the I think we just executed the awkward pause 110% better than they ever have.
So let's wrap it up on one other report down in North Carolina. This is kind of a tricky thing, I think, for people to grasp, but they took a first step towards defying a desired federal prohibition scheme on raw milk. S711 was just signed into law and went into effect at the end of last month.
Yeah, so this is what we call it's commonly called a herd sharing agreement, and basically it's an end run around the prohibition on selling raw milk. So instead of saying we're going to let you buy raw milk, they let you buy a share of a herd, and then you're allowed to get milk from the farmer who's taking care of your animals for you. And I don't know, it's kind of a weird legal thing, but the end result is it allows people to buy raw milk when they weren't able to before. And so it begins to open the door for a raw milk market to grow and expand. And many times in these states that have herd shares, it doesn't take long before we start to see some retail sales from the farm, and then possibly even moving further to where we have actual retail sales. So this is definitely a first step. It's a weird legal thing, but the end result is that people in North Carolina will now have a way to access raw milk, which was completely illegal for human consumption before.
I mean, we've been talking about how the feds do an end run around state restrictions on asset forfeiture. I think people are always looking for loopholes to advance what they want. Generally, the loopholes have been used to oppress people, to violate their rights, to reduce liberty, or to attack it. So why not find loopholes where you can flip the switch, flip things around? And I think this approach in a place like North Carolina is a great strategy. And you don't even have to be a raw milk supporter or a consumer to recognize that, oh, when you find an opening, go for it. Start creating a market where people can, even in a small situation, can buy or sell products. Why don't the gun rights supporters look for loopholes like this? Buy, sell products, and then push things forward. And when people aren't just the market is stronger than government. That's the end result. Government is always in the way of markets, and the more layers that we can find out of the way, there are a lot of them, the more that you get government out of the way, the more that the market can actually just operate. And then when the market operates, people recognize it, and then it can grow from there. I think that's the end message. We're talking about human action, of course. We were both at the Take Human Action Bash a little over a week or so ago, I guess 10 days ago in New Orleans, which was awesome. And I think we can keep pushing that message here. And I got to close it again with a message from our sponsors. If you do support us, and I know we're joking a lot, but we really operate on a shoestring budget like you wouldn't believe. At some point, I had done some research a few years ago that we matched, or the Heritage Foundation matched, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, both organizations, right and left, that really oppose our work to nullify federal overreach. They reach our annual budget every, 8 to 10 minutes in fundraising. So we do a lot. And when Ed Snowden's attorney said to us in New York, you guys are punching above your weight class, we really are. But we'd like to punch even further above our weight class, or maybe get closer to the weight class so we can have a really strong network. We should welcome also Clay Davis, who's going to help us in doing direct outreach for legislative action. He's right now just, first day at the gig here at 10th Amendment Center, pushing to coordinate legislators on privacy and surveillance issues. And I'm sure we'll find some other things that Clay can work on. But let's give Clay a big welcome. The more when we can raise funds, then we can actually, there are a lot of people who want to work with us. And a lot of people do some volunteer work. But at the end of the day, when we can actually end up at some point paying a bunch of people to do full-time work so they don't have to be burned out from their day-to-day job that they don't believe in, that they're just doing to put food on the table, we are going to be huge. We're nowhere close to that, but throw in $2 a month now, and that will help us build the foundation to get to the next level. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Of course, We love you for watching. Thank you so much for being here with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks here at 10th or Tuesday.